are focusing on something that has been so important in our American history and so life affirming through these last several decades. For those of you who don't know me, again, my name is Terrisa Bukovinac. I have been one of the co-leaders for Secular Pro-Life for many years, starting one of my first projects with Secular Pro-Life was originally helping out with a campaign that our president, Kelsey Hazzard, came up with called Hello Hyde. And it was to celebrate the Hyde Amendment on its 40th anniversary. And there's going to be a lot of people here tonight talking about what the Hyde Amendment means and what it is. So I assure you, you are going to be educated shortly. But I'm very excited to be supporting this effort once again. Here we are in another election cycle. And one of the reasons that Kelsey made this so important in 2016 was because it was an election year and the Hyde Amendment had come under attack from pro-abortion extremists. Now it has almost become a mainstream position, especially for many in the Democratic Party. And it's more important than ever that we come together in order to destigmatize the Hyde Amendment and to bring visibility to the lives that the Hyde Amendment has saved, which is over 2 million American lives. And we are so honored tonight to be joined by Dr. Michael New, who has done the original and continuing research on the Hyde Amendment. And he's going to explain to you in much further detail how we've arrived at those numbers and why the Hyde Amendment continues to be such an important part of a life-affirming cause. Again, I mentioned I'm with Secular Pro-Life, so I am a secular person. I'm an atheist, but Secular Pro-Life proudly represents pro-life people from across the religious spectrum, and we help the community as a whole make pro-life arguments from a secular perspective. And we seek to create an environment within the pro-life community for non-traditional pro-life people. So that can mean a lot of different things for a lot of different people. And we're really honored that you have joined us tonight. I'm really excited to announce our first speaker. Oh, by the way, I'm your MC, if that wasn't clear. I will be introducing your speakers this evening and trying to keep things on schedule. We will not be taking up your entire evening, but definitely want to make sure that you're educated, informed, and hopefully a little entertained while you're with us tonight. So without further ado, I want to introduce our president and founder of this movement, of truly the secular pro-life movement, someone who literally started this organization in 2009 and has since then grown this to a worldwide movement. The one, the only, Kelsey Hazzard!
Wow, thank you very much for that introduction. I will endeavor to live up to it. As Terrisa said, my name is Kelsey Hazzard, and I'm the founder and president of Secular Pro-Life. We're so excited to present out of Hyding, and even though I wish I could be with everybody in person, I'm thrilled to have you all join us virtually. Tonight's speaking lineup really centers the people who have benefited the most from the Hyde Amendment, and that's Medicaid kids and their parents. I know you're really eager to hear their personal stories, so we'll get to them shortly. I promise not to take up too much of your time because I am not a Medicaid kid. I am, however, a lawyer, so my role tonight is just going to be to give a brief overview of the legal history, to give some context to those personal stories for those of you in the audience who might not be as familiar with the Hyde Amendment. So let's start at the beginning. Let's start with the name. Why is it called the Hyde Amendment? Well, Hyde is for Henry Hyde, who is the Illinois congressman who first introduced the Hyde Amendment back in 1976. So that's simple enough. But why the Hyde Amendment? Why not the Hyde Act or the Hyde Law? That is because the Hyde Amendment is not a standalone law. It's actually a rider to the federal budget. Every time that Congress has passed a budget, every year since 1976, the Hyde Amendment has been tacked on with bipartisan support. And what the Hyde Amendment does is limit federal taxpayer funding of abortions primarily through the Medicaid program. So here's our annual budget, here's the money that's going to Medicaid, and you cannot put that money toward elective abortions. So if a pregnant mother is on Medicaid, it will cover her medical expenses for giving birth to that child, but Medicaid will not pay to kill her child in an abortion. That's the Hyde Amendment in a nutshell. Some of you may have heard of the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act. That is a bill to codify the Hyde Amendment, essentially make it permanent, so that we wouldn't have to go through the budget writer process every time. But unfortunately, the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act is only proposed legislation. It had passed the House a few times back when we had pro-life control of the House, but it stalled in the Senate and it was never signed into law. So we do continue to have the annual Hyde Amendment budget vote. I feel it's important to acknowledge some limitations of the Hyde Amendment. It does not apply to babies conceived in rape. It does not prevent abortion businesses like Planned Parenthood from receiving taxpayer funding through other avenues. It also does not protect Medicaid kids in every state. That's because Medicaid is funded jointly by federal taxpayer funds and state taxpayer funds. Most states have policies for their share of the Medicaid money to echo the Hyde Amendment and prohibit taxpayer funding of abortion. But in a handful of states, activist judges have undermined the Hyde Amendment and forced state taxpayer funds to subsidize the abortion industry. So with all that said, despite those limitations, the Hyde Amendment nevertheless may be the pro-life movement's single greatest achievement, because over 2.4 million Americans are alive today thanks to the Hyde Amendment. And that estimate comes courtesy of Dr. New, who will address us later tonight. The Hyde Amendment passed exactly 44 years ago today, that first budget rider back on September 30th, 1976. 44th anniversary is today. If you were born through the Medicaid program in those 44 years, the odds that the Hyde Amendment saved your life are 1 in 9. Now, most people who were saved by the Hyde Amendment don't necessarily know that. Loving parents aren't going to just openly say, yeah, I would have aborted you if Uncle Sam were footing the bill. That would be a horrible thing to admit to your child. The Hyde Amendment matters both because it saves lives and because it sends a message about our national values. It says we don't believe people are better off dead than poor. It says we don't believe Medicaid kids should be targeted for destruction. And it says we won't force people of conscience to be complicit in killing children in the womb just by paying their taxes. Getting back to the legal history, abortion activists filed a lawsuit against the Hyde Amendment shortly after it was first enacted in a case called Harris v. McRae. They claimed that not using taxpayer funds for abortions was legislating Catholic doctrine in violation of the Establishment Clause. Because what atheist wouldn't want their hard-earned money to be used to kill unborn babies? Well, this atheist certainly would not. Thankfully, the Supreme Court did not buy that argument, and the Hyde Amendment was upheld. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was not on the Supreme Court at the time, but years later, she had a comment about Harris v. McRae. She was surprised by the result because, frankly, I had thought that at the time Roe was decided, there was concern about population growth, and particularly growth in populations that we don't want to have too many of. She came under a lot of fire for that statement, for the eugenicist assumptions underlying that comment, and that criticism was justly deserved. Certainly her recent death does not make her immune from criticism. And I want to make sure that we remember when we hear that kind of thing, that the context of that ugly statement was opposition to the Hyde Amendment. Tonight, we celebrate the growth in populations that some people didn't want to have too many of. We celebrate Medicaid kids like Gina and Georgia and Valeria's sons, and millions more. We celebrate our neighbors, our friends, our classmates, our coworkers, and our family members. And we gird ourselves for battle because the Hyde Amendment is under threat. The average cost of an abortion is $508. The 2.4 million people whose deaths were averted by the Hyde Amendment represent $1 billion in lost revenue to the abortion industry. That's $1 billion with a B. And with the abortion rate plummeting to its lowest level since Roe v. Wade, and abortion centers shutting down left and right, even in blue states, they're clamoring for a government bailout. Pro-abortion extremists are taking over the Democratic Party, and they have signaled very clearly that if they gain power in Washington, the years of common ground on the Hyde Amendment are over. It's our responsibility to preserve the Hyde Amendment for the next generation. This is life or death for millions of marginalized people. So I appreciate all of you coming out for Out of Hiding to show your support tonight. It's going to take a concerted effort from every last one of us. Thank you very much, Terrisa.
Thank you so much, Kelsey. So inspiring. Are you guys feeling educated now? I know I am. I am really thrilled to announce we have a few speakers tonight who can actually speak to how Hyde has been life-saving and life-affirming in their own lives. And I'm excited to share their stories with you. First tonight, we're going to hear from Gina Mallica, who has been involved in this campaign for quite some time and has a very compelling personal story. I'd like you to hear from her now.
Thank you.
Gina, are you with us?
Yes, hi, I'm here. Hello to everyone out there. Thank you so much for coming tonight. Yesterday was actually my birthday, and I think that's really fitting because I'm about to tell you the circumstances surrounding my birth. So back in 1988, my parents escaped from communist Cuba and immigrated to the United States when my mother was 5 months pregnant with me. She actually says that she was like trying to hide her baby bump from the officials at the airport in case they tried to tell her she couldn't fly when she was pregnant or something like that. But thankfully, nothing like that happened. They were able to come to the United States and eventually landed in California. They literally came with just the clothes on their backs and each other. I don't even know if they had a bag because what would they have put in it? But thankfully, my mom's siblings had immigrated prior to her and were able to help her out. They helped my dad get a job. He spoke some English he learned in the university in Cuba, and they helped my mom sign up for Medicaid. So that was how she was able to get prenatal health care for herself and of course for me. So I was born under Medicaid. And then after I was born, we used programs such as WIC to get us by. So by the time my brother was born 5 years later, my parents weren't on Medicaid anymore. But though I know that Medicaid must have been very important to them in those first 5 years in America. So I say that my parents are like that classic American dream. They immigrated to the United States for a better life for them, for me, for my brother to come along later, and the government assisted them. That assistance was Medicaid. That healthcare was what they needed. What no one under Medicaid, what no immigrant, what no one in a dire circumstance needs is a government subsidized abortion. The circumstances surrounding how or why someone ends up on Medicaid has nothing to do with the worth of the individual born. So when we hear people criticizing the Hyde Amendment, they usually use language like, oh, hundreds of thousands, if not million, of women haven't had the opportunity to exercise their right to choose their private healthcare matters. And that is very flowery language that sounds like maybe we should be helping these poor women on Medicaid. But the choices that they're talking about are people. The choices that they're referring to is only one choice, and that's abortion, which is going to end the life of someone conceived under Medicaid. And most of the time, the majority of the time, that person is what we could call non-white. So someone who checks off every single box and any single box besides that white non-Hispanic one. I find that personally offensive. I am personally hurt by that as someone whose parents came to this country and needed help from the government, real help, not just government-funded death for a child. So that is why I find it personally hurtful and offensive when people criticize the Hyde Amendment. I'm not necessarily one of the 1 in 9, because I know, you know, my parents have talked to me like they had been married already. My mom, like I said, was 5 months pregnant. They were happy about that pregnancy, but it doesn't really matter. There's no difference in the self-worth, in the worth of a human being between me, the kid that was born on Medicaid right before me, and the kid that was born on Medicaid right after me. There's no difference between any of us. And finally, I'd like to share with you guys my favorite Medicaid kid, not just me. This is my niece, Laura. She was in that video in the beginning, if you happen to catch it. She is 8 years old, and my brother was 18 when him and his girlfriend at the time faced an unplanned pregnancy. So they signed up for Medicaid, and that's how my niece's mom got her health care, and that's how my niece was born. 8 years later, my brother and his ex-girlfriend now are doing a great job co-parenting, even though they're not together. They're both successful in their relative fields. And Laura is thriving in school and just lights up everyone's life. It's not always easy. My parents struggled a lot when they first came here with nothing. My brother and his girlfriend also struggled. Clearly, they qualified for Medicaid and faced an unplanned pregnancy as teens. But that, again, doesn't matter. We're talking about human beings' lives. We're talking about people. That 2.4 million is people, just like me, no more, no less. The circumstances surrounding our birth does not define us. And just like I was really happy to celebrate my birthday yesterday, it's never a bad thing that more people get to celebrate their birthday, regardless of where they came from. Thank you guys so much for joining us tonight and listening to my little story.
Thank you so much, Gina. Such a touching story. And I just really, really always appreciate your continued help on this particular cause that secular pro-life has been involved in. And thank you. Now we're going to hear from someone else who's also been a part of this effort for some time. Valeria Lopez. Valerie, are you there? I saw she turned her camera on. Great. Yes, we can see you.
Awesome.
Hey.
Hi everyone. I love hearing that story. I've known about it for time, and I think it's amazing that you are so supportive of this and that your family, you know, were able to have you and you're here. Just like I once used Medicaid to bring my children into this world. So I'm a Medicaid mom. It's a very long story, but when I was 20 years old, at the height of my college career in Laredo, Texas A&M International University, I was in my junior year of my bachelor's degree, knee deep in pro-life work and about a million other things. So busy that I did not realize that I had missed various periods and was pregnant with my boyfriend of 2 years. Now, at the moment, I was completely floored, shocked, all the things. And being pro-life, I had never been in the position. I had only been an advice-giving person to somebody else who was in an unplanned pregnancy. So for me, I was just like, well, now I gotta take my own advice. I'm gonna be brave, I'm gonna be strong. And I was so excited. Of course, being 20 and in college, I was still, kind of extremely nervous because how was I going to just randomly become a mom? Crazy enough, when I found out that I was 6 months pregnant, I kid you not, 6 months pregnant, my worry went into so much more overdrive. And I was so thankful for Medicaid at that time. We used Medicaid to bring my son into the world. And on May 10th, Mexican Mother's Day was the exact day my first son, Noah, was born. And since then, I have been completely thankful for the opportunity to have my son and his brother 3 years later, Naeem, through Medicaid. Like Gina said, my kids have no less value than anybody else born through a different type of insurance. I was able to have them because of Medicaid. I was not working any full-time jobs. I was working part-time at my school, and without the help of Medicaid, I have no idea what I would have done. But I'm so glad that I had that help. And yeah, my kids received Medicaid for some time. They received health care through Medicaid, and I'm so grateful for that. My kids are now 6 and 3. These are my boys. I don't have them with me because it's 8 o'clock here where I live in San Antonio, Texas, and they're both in bed. But they are the light of mine and my husband's lives, and we are so, so grateful that the Hyde Amendment protects that it allows women and families in a crisis to feel secure, to feel like they can provide healthcare, they can provide the most basic needs of their children's lives that they can. And without the Hyde Amendment, maybe the temptation to do something horrific would be there more for people. And it's great. I celebrate, honestly, the fact that that's not the case now. So yeah, if anybody has any questions for me or anything, just drop them in the Q&A.
Thank you so much. You are so amazing. I'm just so honored to be a part of this project with you guys, and just to see the evolution of your work. You're such great speakers, and it's just such an honor to have you here. We were hoping also for one other speaker who could speak directly to their lived experience with the Hyde Amendment. Georgia Gallagher, we highly recommend that you look up her story. I know that she's juggling work right now, so she may not be able to join us, but know that she wanted to be here, and we'll hopefully be able to squeeze her in at the end if she's able to jump on. But at this time, we are going to actually hear from the man of the hour, Dr. Michael New, who has, like Kelsey and I both mentioned, he actually has done all of the research that we have on the Hyde Amendment. In fact, I believe that it was Secular Pro-Life that initially commissioned the research that Dr. New did back in 2016. But that information has become very valuable to the pro-life movement as a whole, and as Kelsey clearly articulated. So now we're going to hear from the man who has done the research, who can speak to exactly why and how we know that the Hyde Amendment has in fact saved these lives. So welcome to the online event, Dr. New.
Thank you all for having me. Really do want to thank both Terrisa and Kelsey for their great work in organizing this. As you're probably aware, the Hyde Amendment has become a lot more salient as a political issue. Used to be something that would pass every year without much excitement or controversy. But if you follow politics, you're well aware of the fact that it's going to be a campaign issue in 2020. That means we as pro-lifers need to be informed about its great history, about its positive impact, and we need to be prepared to defend it. So again, I really think that these events to highlight all the good the Hyde Amendment has done are a great idea, and I'm very grateful that Terrisa and Kelsey have given me a time to speak. So Kelsey already did a good job giving some history about Hyde, but I just want to add a few things. That, as you all know, the tragic Roe v. Wade decision was handed down in 1973, and pro-lifers of that era, I think, realized that reversing Roe in the short term was not necessarily going to be all that likely. But they want to do some things to at least try to protect some unborn children in the short term and protect the conscience rights of taxpayers in the short term. And the solution they came up with was the Hyde Amendment. They thought that we can't necessarily stop abortion or reverse Roe v. Wade. We can at least try to get the federal government, by and large, out of the business of funding elective abortions through the Medicaid program. So that's where the Hyde Amendment first came, and it was first passed in 1976. And as such, it was one of the really first major political victories for pro-lifers. Then, unsurprisingly, it was challenged, like most pro-life laws are, and it went through the legal system in the late 70s. Finally, the Supreme Court agreed to hear the legal challenge to the Hyde Amendment. And in Harris v. McRae in 1980, they upheld the Hyde Amendment. So this was not only a legislative victory for the pro-life movement, it was a legal victory as well. So it has a great history. It also shows that even on an issue as polarizing and as divisive as abortion, there can be some bipartisan consensus. The original Hyde Amendment in 1976 passed with the votes of 103 House Democrats. During his presidency, President Clinton routinely signed appropriations bills that had the Hyde Amendment. President Obama also routinely signed appropriations bills that had the Hyde Amendment. So this has kind of a bipartisan legacy. It's also popular. There have been at least 7 polls since the summer of 2016 on the issue of taxpayer funding for abortion. 6 of the 7 show that majorities oppose taxpayer funding of abortion, and all 7 show that pluralities oppose taxpayer funding of abortion. And opposition to taxpayer funding of abortion is strong amongst Democrats, and there's a substantial number of people who identify as pro-choice who oppose taxpayer funding for elective abortions. But the most important legacy of the Hyde Amendment, in my opinion, is the fact that it has saved lives. And since I'm speaking, I got some good news for you. I have a PowerPoint presentation. So I'm going to share the screen here. I hope this works. And I have a short presentation to just go over some of the research about the impact of the positive impact of the Hyde Amendment. So again, when it comes to kind of research on sanctity of life issues, very often there's lots of disagreement. Sometimes pro-life researchers say one thing, and quote-unquote pro-abortion or pro-choice researchers say something else. But on the issue of taxpayer funding for elective abortions or limits on Medicaid funding for abortion, there's a lot of consensus. Because basically everybody agrees you cut off taxpayer funding for abortion, abortion numbers go down. And there are at least 3 studies of this that have come out in the past 11 years. In 2009, the Guttmacher Institute, which up until 2006 or 2007 was the research arm of Planned Parenthood, they did a comprehensive literature review. They looked at studies in economics, in political science, and public health, and they found very clearly that a vast majority of studies show that limits on Medicaid funding of abortion lower abortion rates. In fact, they even kind of critiqued the studies and identified as some being better than others. And they said the best studies found that 18 to 37% of pregnancies that would have ended in Medicaid-funded abortions were carried to term when funding was no longer available. So again, some pregnancies that would have resulted in abortion were carried to term because of the Hyde Amendment, effectively is what they're saying here. In 2010, the Center for Reproductive Rights, obviously a group that supports legal abortion, they did a study. They found the Hyde Amendment saved around 1 million lives. My 2016 Charlotte Lozier Institute study, which I revised this past summer, found the Hyde Amendment saved over 2.4 million lives. So we have just a real consensus here. We have 2 groups that support legal abortion. We have me, I'm pro-life. We all agree the Hyde Amendment has had a big impact and has saved literally millions of lives since 1976. Now, we heard about the 1 in 9 statistic, and that's a statistic that I helped calculate when I did my Lozier Institute study 4 years ago. And again, I identified 3 studies, and most of the research I've looked at, just for some background, looks at how the Medicaid funding of abortion affects abortion rates. But there's a few studies that look at how limits on Medicaid funding of abortion affect birth rates, and specifically birth rates to women on Medicaid. And if you see kind of on this slide, there's a very kind of strong consensus here that when you look at these studies, there's a very strong consensus that, again, when you cut off Medicaid funding for elective abortion, birth rates increase. And they increase pretty consistently, anywhere from about 11.4% to 15%. And Guttmacher actually praises all 3 of these studies for having strong research design. So I've averaged that the birth rate to Medicaid, to women on Medicaid, increased by about 13% when you cut off taxpayer funding for elective abortions. So as such, when Medicaid quits covering elective abortions, you see the birth rate to women on Medicaid increase by 13%. So that means that roughly 1 in 9 people born to a woman on Medicaid owe their lives to the Hyde Amendment. So again, That doesn't necessarily mean that everybody on Medicaid was seeking to have an abortion when they got pregnant. But again, we see from the increase in the birth rate to women on Medicaid, we see that again, roughly 1 in 9 people whose mother was on Medicaid when they were born owe their lives to the Hyde Amendment. So again, these studies are all considered by Guttmacher to have strong research designs. So again, very strong consensus that the Hyde Amendment has saved lives. So please, do not let anyone tell you that pro-life political involvement has been for naught. Again, there's 2.4 million women who've been spared a lifetime of regret because of the Hyde Amendment, and 2.4 million people walking around today who owe their lives to the Hyde Amendment. So again, it's a great law, has a great legacy. We need to promote it. We need to defend it. We should be knowledgeable about it. And again, I really want to thank both Terrisa and Kelsey for giving me some agenda time. If you have questions, you can feel free to email me, michael.j.new@gmail.com. Also follow me on Twitter. I tweet out analyses of the Hyde Amendment and other kinds of pro-life laws frequently. I'm happy to take any questions people might have later on. And it looks like the chat box is pretty live. So we're going to stop the share.
Great. Oh, are you guys just so into Dr. New's PowerPoints? I have always been a fan, and if this is your first time seeing one of Dr. New's PowerPoints, I hope that you will not make it your last, and I think that you won't. We are so grateful to you, Dr. New. You are just, you've done so much for this cause, and just thank you so much. We had asked for questions beforehand so that we could screen them, and we actually did get one. So I am going to throw that out there, but if people want to add some additional comments in the chat, maybe Kelsey, you might be able to pull some questions you think, if you think they're appropriate and you're able to see them. I'm on mobile, so it's a little difficult.
Yes, I am on it. Hey.
Yes. Okay.
All
great.
Right. There have been some fantastic questions dropped in the chat, but I do want to prioritize the person who gave their question in advance via email. That comes from our good friends at No Termination Without Representation. They had a question about the role of civil disobedience. Obviously, we want to hold our politicians accountable, punish anti-Hyde politicians at the ballot box, and support those politicians who will preserve Hyde. That's our first line of defense, but we do need to be looking ahead. I know it's easy to become myopic and election focused in 2020 with the vote so close, but we do need to keep a broader view. So I'm really glad that this was brought up. In particular, the question was raised of the tactic of, if in the worst case scenario, Hyde is reversed or not enacted in a particular budget, thus subsidizing abortion with tax dollars, is it appropriate to refuse to file your tax return as a form of civil disobedience? And they actually raised the example of one or two individuals who have done this or who have attempted this in protest of taxpayer funding of Planned Parenthood. So this would kick it up another notch, and is that the appropriate response to the threat to Hyde? And I do think that civil disobedience in some form definitely has a role to play here. This is serious. We're talking about tens of thousands of lives in danger every year without the Hyde Amendment in place. So I'm glad that we are having a conversation about civil disobedience. With that said, my concern about the refusing to file a return, that particular action as a form of civil disobedience, is that it's not, I don't think it's scalable to the level that we need it to be. And the reason for that is, most Americans are wage earners, and we have our taxes deducted from our paychecks before we ever even see them. Most of us who file a return do so in the hope of getting a tax refund. And that's particularly true for pro-life people who are statistically lower income than pro-choice people. So my concern is, certainly the minority of pro-life people who are self-employed or who own a business and who want to make their conscience known in this way, and they're willing to take the risk, and they understand that jail time's a possibility. If they are prepared to Very funny, Dr. New. If they're prepared to take that risk and they want to do that, certainly I'm not going to stand in their way. But it's not really an available method of protest to the vast majority of pro-life people whose tax funds are siphoned to the IRS in an automated way. So I'd like to think bigger. I think again, I'm glad we're having a conversation about civil disobedience. Terrisa and I were brainstorming earlier about some possible alternatives. One thing that just jumped into my mind was possibly surrounding IRS buildings. That could be a fun time, and IRS buildings, conveniently enough, are not covered by the FACE Act. So that's just a conversation that we hope to start having. There's no plan in place at this time, but we are definitely open to that conversation. And if people have ideas about creative methods of resistance in this area, you are welcome to bring those to our attention.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelsey. I heard there's another question in the chat. Gina, did you want to introduce the question?
There's quite a few questions in the chat. Yeah. Well, let's see. I guess I'm going to try to go in order of when they were asked. Herb had a question. Hello, Herb. Asking, and let me just dig it up really quick here. Asking, do you have any advice for people who live in states that undermine, hide, and directly fund abortion? So this is the people in the handful of states where, unfortunately, your state tax dollars are going toward abortions. That's a great question. Definitely, that's something that's going to vary from state to state. You should be in touch with your state and regional Right to Life affiliates on that issue for more specific advice. I will say that one tactic that is being employed in that situation is state-level constitutional amendments against taxpayer funding of abortion. That's something you can support. There are ballot measures. Louisiana actually is pursuing such a ballot measure in a prophylactic way this election cycle. They are not yet in that situation, and they hope never to be, so they are already pursuing that. So even if you are in a state that currently does have those high protections, you can take a step to prevent judicial activism. And if you are in a state where sadly that has already happened, you can still pursue state constitutional amendment and support the politicians in your state who are willing to back those types of reforms. Does anybody else have anything more specific or any other thoughts in response to either of those questions?
Yeah, I mean, this is a great way to battle that, to show, all the people that this has saved, to get the word out and encourage that as well, so that people know and can celebrate with us the value of all of these lives, for sure.
One thing I would say would be just try quote unquote liberal states. And sometimes ballot propositions work. In West Virginia, they were able to stop Medicaid funding for abortion in 2018 through a ballot campaign. So a big thing I think is just raising awareness, letting people know about it, trying to build some momentum somehow. Just greater awareness, I think, works to our advantage.
Another question that was dropped in the chat, this is from Sarah Terrisa. Where can we find a copy of the study by Dr. New? We have set up a website, outofhyding.com, hiding with a Y because we're punny, and there's a resources section at the bottom of the page that includes both Dr. New's original 2016 study and his update from earlier this year. Those are both made publicly available through the Charlotte Lozier Institute.
There was a question on the Facebook Live, so thank you for you guys watching on Facebook.
Yes.
I don't have the answer. Maybe Dr. New does, or maybe you do, Kelsey. But Rebecca asked, how do we respond to bad polling, specifically ones which don't actually mention that overturning Hyde would involve taxpayer-funded abortions?
I think we do that by sharing videos like this one and, and you know, getting the word out as much as we can and saying, hey, this is 2.4 million people actually walking around. And Dr. New, maybe hadn't you, I believe you had calculated the number of abortion, the expected increase in the absence of Hyde. I think, or you had done that in Illinois. Can you elaborate on that, Dr. New, like on an annual
Sure.
basis?
Basically, on an annual basis, I've calculated the Hyde Amendment saves over 60,000 lives a year. And we even saw good data from Illinois, which tragically, they changed their law. They sadly now start funding abortion through Medicaid. And yeah, number of taxpayer-funded abortions increased dramatically. There's now thousands of abortions being paid for by taxpayers in Illinois. So we know that, we don't know, can't say for certain what the exact figure is, but my estimate's about 60,000. And one thing I'll be in touch with Kelsey and Terrisa, that we have good polling, which even though there may be a few outlier polls here and there, again, by and large, most people, do not want their taxpayer dollars going to pay for elective abortions. And we have at least 7 polls since the summer of 2016. I can send just a memo that I've put together, and we can hopefully upload to the website that just lists all those polls. There are different polling companies, different question wordings, and law consensus that yes, taxpayer funding for abortion, for elective abortion, is unpopular.
Great. Thank you. Did we want to take any more questions, or is that pretty much it?
I think we had wanted to stay under 45 minutes. I believe that was the plan. So
yes, it is.
I
so we're going to wrap it up.
I apologize to those whose questions we didn't get to. Maybe I'll address them in a subsequent blog post or something. But yeah, really appreciate you all coming out. This has been a fantastic event. This is the first time we have attempted a webinar style event like this, and it went swimmingly. So thank you all.
And I want to personally thank everyone as your MC. Thank you for joining this event. And remind you guys that there is a little bit of homework involved with this, that like Dr. New and Kelsey said continuously, this is about visibility. It's about finding ways of doing direct action, of letting our legislators know that there is strong support for the Hyde Amendment. And in order to do that, we have to make our voices heard. And we can do that by sharing on social media, commenting on social media, sharing this event, getting other people involved, talking about the Hyde Amendment. All of those things truly do matter. And that is how we are going to build a life-affirming culture in this country. So thank you again all for joining. Call your legislators, continue to support secular pro-life, and continue to bring people out of hiding. Thank you so much.